Hello, fellow translators. Today I wanted to talk to you about books. And as you may or may not know, I like to read. I read quite a bit. I read about 150 books a year or so. And in fact, for a while I was doing these videos on books, but then I decided to stop. I would only do videos on books if they had to do with either translation, like language linguistics, stuff to do with translation, or with like the freelance aspect of it, you know, the entrepreneurship side or business side or something like that. So today I'm going to do neither of those, but I'm just going to talk about some books I've been reading. But there's a reason for that, and the reason is lately I've been reading a lot of translated works, and I think translated works are very important for people to read if they are in translation, as we all are. And I say this because many people say that that reading fiction, say, is a waste of time, or you can do it in your spare time, but it doesn't mean anything. And first of all, I think that's wrong for many different reasons. But for translators, the main thing is if you read works in translation, so works that were originally written in another language, translated into whatever language you're reading it in, then it actually kind of counts as work in a way. And I like it a lot because what I find myself doing is I end up reading not only the story that the author wanted me to read, but I kind of get to read it through the lens that the translator saw it through, right? And so I get to, I feel like I get this other perspective almost. And knowing that it was written in another language, I kind of get this sense that I get to, I don't know, sort of see how and why they made the decisions they made. So, for instance, I recently finished reading The Murmur of Bees, which was originally written in Spanish, but I got to see why they translated certain words into English, but other words they kept in Spanish, and you kind of, at least for me, I find it very interesting to see how and why they chose to do this and that and the other. So anyway, I just wanted to share some works that I've been reading in translation. Some of them are physical books, some of them are on Kindle, and I think on Audible as well. But I just wanted to talk about them a bit. Anyway, I'll get to it because here I'm blabbering and blabbering on. Let's start with The Murmur of Bees, as I mentioned. So The Murmur of Bees, I read, it was on Kindle. I have it there on my phone. It's a book by Sofia Segovia. I think it's her first work that was translated into English. And it's a big book, 462 pages, I think, something like that. It's kind of an epic. And I liked it a lot. I'm embarrassed to say it sort of reminded me of The House of Spirits by Isabel Allende. It's been in fact, it's been decades. It's been since high school since I read that book. But a couple times when I was reading this, it reminded me of that book. This probably kind of shows more about me than anyone else. It shows how few Latin American authors I've read because, Isabel Allende, The House of Spirits, takes place down in Chile, while The Murmur of Bees, this takes place in northern Mexico. You can't get further away from each other in terms of Latin America. And the fact that one reminded me of the other kind of shows my lack of knowledge, my lack of exposure to Latin American literature. But be that as it may, it did remind me of that. And, because it spans a few generations of a family, it has a bit of magical realism in it. And the characters are going through the changes of politics and the revolutions and the external changes of international events. And you see the way they affect this family over many generations. Both books do this. And so that's why one reminded me of the other. Anyway, The Murmur of Bees was an intense, epic journey. Goes through the family and the characters that are attached to it or that kind of revolve around this family over these generations, and it was great. It's a great way, I felt, to kind of get lost into this world of in northern Mexico of 100 years ago, and see the international events going on and what's going on with the family. And so, yeah, if you are interested, I think, in Latin American or more specifically Mexican literature, then this will be a great one. It is a long book, and so you kind of get into it. Give yourself time to get into it. Don't race through it. But I think you'll get a lot of pleasure from it, and you'll really like it a lot. Once again, it's called The Murmur of Bees by Sofia Segovia. I don't know what what it was originally in Spanish, what the title was, but anyway, you can find it. I read the one in English, obviously. So the next book I'm going to talk about is, sorry, because I have my notes and stuff online here. Oh yeah, so it'll be this one, Everlasting Empire by Yi In-hwa. So Yi In-hwa is he's apparently a professor, and he really knows his history. And in fact, the introduction to this was by Don Baker, who is another professor of history. This book, in a way, is a dream come true for me, because it is sort of like, again, it reminds me of something else, and I might be saying more of myself than anyone else when I say this, but it reminded me a lot of The Name of the Rose. And but I mean, here too, it has a lot in common. So it starts off with the author, it's basically the narrator, finding a manuscript from the olden, from way many years ago, let's say, and this manuscript tells of a story, and the story, starts off with a murder, and then there's whole kind of murder mystery and thing going on behind it, and it's that's the exact same thing with The Name of the Rose. That's how that starts off. Of course, that takes place in a medieval abbey in northern Italy, and this takes place in the Chosen Dynasty in the royal court and around there. And having said that, I think this in a way is more intense than The Name of the Rose, because most of the characters here are real. In fact, at the beginning, they have a list of the characters, and as these are all real people, or the majority of them, I should say, are real people. Some of them apparently aren't, and they have the dates of when they were born, and then all this stuff, and born and died and all that stuff. And it's so anyway, I found it very interesting. I found it very confusing as well. I thought I knew a bit about Korean history during this time. I knew, for instance, that I knew about Prince Sado, the prince who was kind of locked in a box by his father and stuff like that. I knew the outline of it, let's say, but I really feel like this, if you're not Korean or if you don't know about Korean history, there's a lot of detail here. So it's good to have a list of characters, because they have many characters here. And these are Korean names, so many of them share last names. And they also, to me, it would have helped to have also broad outline of sort of, a lot of what's going on behind the scenes here is the fighting between two different factions. One's more conservative, one's a bit more progressive, and they're called the kind of old-fashioned doctrine, and then the Southern doctrine. But then it's like the old-fashioned doctrine is more in favor of certain things of like Catholics, which obviously are a new thing, but it's just because over hundreds of years things have been changing. In fact, there used to be the Northern and Southern faction, then East-West, and then it went all over the place. So it would have helped to kind of have a diagram of how that was working at the time, I think, at least. And then I also thought a map would have helped. I don't know why. It didn't really have much to do with the book, but I was trying to envision where everything was happening in the royal court, or a bit outside it, or as part of it, or just in town or something. And I was having a bit of difficulty with that. But having said that, I did give this 5 stars, which I do rarely. I thought it was excellent because it had that quality to it, and it was really what I wanted. A good historical, mystery, but done really well by a historian, that takes place in the Chosen Dynasty. And they have some great stuff, like arguments against democracy and progressivism. Here's a quote that they have. A restoration is not possible in a democracy. The saying that the people are masters is a sort of intellectual syllogism, meaning that no one is the master. The president is a constitutional ruler elected by the people, so he is not the master. And anyway, because a lot of it is debates back and forth, like with The Name of the Rose, where they debated many things back and forth about religion, about whether Jesus owned the clothes he wore, about whether it is human to laugh or not, or if we should be laughing, or whether unicorns and lions exist, or something like that. Like a lot of cool stuff. And here they do the same. They also have other stuff about how the Qin Emperor in China, it was called the first emperor of the Qin dynasty, had all the books that existed burnt, but Confucius came before then, so technically all the books by Confucius were burnt during that time, and so all that we have of Confucius was written later by memory, but also corrupted by Lao Tzu's teaching, Taoism, which was going around during the time after that when they were rewriting all of Confucius' books. Anyway, and these are arguments they're having back and forth here. I find stuff like that fascinating. I don't know much about it, but I really like reading stuff like that. So anyway, this, once again, isn't just a simple murder mystery, but a lot of stuff is going on and a lot of discussions. It's more of an excuse to enter into their world and see, what life was like and the way they thought and what was going on during the Chosen Dynasty, people surrounding the king during the time. So anyway, that's Everlasting Empire by Yi In-hwa. The next book I'm going to talk about, how are we on minutes here? It's already almost 10 minutes. So let's just do one more book because I feel like this is otherwise going to drag on way too much. is The Leopard by Giuseppe di Lampedusa, Il Gattopardo. Now, I had never read this in Italian, and I found it in a free, like in Second and Charles, this local bookstore. They have a section with free books they're just giving away, and this was there for free. And it's an Italian classic, so I thought even if it's in English, I'm going to read it because I hadn't read it otherwise. And in Italy, it's a very famous. Everyone knows of the book. But it's and more or less they know. So this guy Giuseppe di Lampedusa, he was basically the last member of nobility from Lampedusa Island, which is off the coast of Sicily, and in fact that's why his name is Di Lampedusa. And so it's kind of a story about his grandfather, I think. Obviously, it's sort of invented, but a lot of the characters, he takes them from real characters who existed, and he talks about the dying of a way of life, of nobility in Italy, when Italy became a country during the Risorgimento. Like 1861 is when Italy became a country, and you had Garibaldi going around and uniting all the kingdoms that made up Italy at the time. And he's talking about a dying way of life there. And there are many, like a famous quote from here is, if we want things to stay as they are, things will have to change. And it talks about that if we want to keep up our lifestyle or whatever, we have to change along with the time. So we have to, and it shows kind of the last person who didn't change and stayed in the old days and all that stuff. I'm not sure how much of this book can be known without knowing about the Risorgimento, about that time period. They do discuss it here for the English. They have a historical note for the English version. But if you're not Italian, it might be a bit hard in that sense. But however, I found this fascinating. I thought it was an excellent book, I think. And in fact, yeah, I gave it 5 stars. So there you go. And it was another 5-star for me. What did I write? I said it shows has a good taste of nobility with all its rules and mannerisms, was being replaced by the more vulgar generation, quote unquote, of businessmen and politicians. And yeah, that's basically the story, but it's a story of a family, and it goes through what they're going through, which and shows the changes within the generations and whatnot. It also describes Sicily as a backdrop, and also as a symbolism of the decline. And Sicily is always a fascinating place to have as a backdrop for any story, I think. Sicily is a very unique place for those of you who don't know, or maybe only know because of mafia or stuff like that. Sicily is quite unique, and so it's very interesting to have any story set there, and this is definitely a very Sicilian work. Once again, it's not a very light read. It takes a lot of work. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of work, but I think some knowledge about what was going on in Italy would really help. But otherwise, it's a great story, and I really like this a lot. That's all I'm going to talk about now. I have other ones that I wanted to get to. But I feel like I've been meandering a bit too much. Killing Commendatore was one I kind of really wanted to get to, by Haruki Murakami. And because that one, Murakami is one of my favorite authors, and that was a recent release of his. It's a long book as well, but that's one of those where you can kind of relax, and you just, with Murakami, to me, it's just entering into that world, and which is always like our world, but a bit off. And I really like Murakami books in that sense. But yeah, and I just want to talk about some works in translation, because I always enjoy them, and I always like then looking up who the translator is. And what I end up doing many times is looking up what other works the translator. So I follow a lot of these translators on Twitter and on Goodreads, and I look up what works the author has written, if I like the book, but also what works the same translator has worked on, because I know they tend to be in the same genre and the same sort of type of book. And so that's how I find a lot of... So if you look over there, you see these books all with the line in the middle. These are all from the Library of Korean Literature or something. These are all Korean works of literature translated into English. And they have a series of them, and I just got into that kind of through the translators, because I found one book and one author and a set of stories, and then I just kept wanting to read other ones. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, but I just wanted to say that I think as translators, it really helps to read works in translation, and it's a lot of fun. You get tastes of books, obviously, so this is from Italian, which I would have read in the original Italian if I had that book, but I don't have it. But otherwise, these are obviously in languages that I don't work with: Spanish, Korean, Murakami was Japanese, and stuff like that. But I still enjoy reading them, because it kind of gives you a taste of the choices they had to make when they decided to translate something or not something else. And it kind of, I don't know, I find it fascinating, and I find it a way to relax, but also feel like is helping me, and is helping me as a translator as well, to get certain ideas and to see how things have been translated. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. If you're interested in any of these books, please let me know. If you are, because I like to talk about them more, or if you want me to talk about other books, like I'm kind of regretting not being able to get to Killing Commendatore, or other books I might have read. But anyway, hopefully you enjoyed these, and please feel free to check out these books if you do come across them, because the ones I mentioned here were all excellent, I thought, and so that's why I wanted to share them with you. And that's pretty much it. I just thought I'd change the pace a bit and do a video that talks about literature translation and about some good books that have been out in various different languages and other languages. And I find it fascinating because it gives you a glimpse into another part of the world as well, into Mexico, into Sicily, into Korea, and other times as well. They all happen to be historical. I guess that says something about me. Well, although Killing Commendatore wasn't historical, but anyway. Okay, I'll stop blabbering. I hope you found this interesting, and it's a bit of a change of pace. Otherwise, I'll talk to you in the next video, and don't forget to click thumbs up if you like this. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, thanks. Bye.